So we've been talking about security planning and management. There are many sort of different pieces that make up this whole process of planning and then managing that security. How do we bring it all together? If you're going to go explain this to someone in a few minutes, what are the things you should be talking about? Well, first of all, you're going to say that there are things that are of value which are at risk. Okay? Maybe your reputation, maybe your intellectual property. There are assets that are of value which are at risk. So then you're going to talk about the risk comes from certain threat sources. Not only there are bad guys out there, of course, we have certain vulnerabilities. Those are the attack vectors. That's why those threat sources would be able to do us harm. That's why we need to worry about. The risk comes from the fact not just because we have something of value, but that thing could be harmed or could be breached. So the threats and attack vectors, really talking about threats and vulnerabilities. Together they come together, result in an attack. So an attack then leads to a breach, and that's where we have the adverse consequences. So if we have that, we had to talk about things that are of value. We had to talk about threats. These two are the reasons that help us explain that there is something at risk and the amount or level of risk that we may have. And the way to manage that risk is to plan for security, implement whatever controls that are meaningful, and then sort of manage that in terms of controls, people, processes, and things like that. And all that has to be done. Again, these controls that we're talking about, of course, we have to look at the cost, the benefits they offer, what impact they have, how user-friendly they are, things like that. So we have to sort of look into the controls that we have, what their effectiveness is. Then we have to identify people. It's their job to worry about security. We have to empower them to do it. They have to have the budgets. They have to be able to have policies that can be enforced and things like that. And those people have to be held responsible and accountable, because we know that if something goes wrong, they should be called to answer what exactly happened. And no matter how well you do that, we have to plan for something going wrong. And when something goes wrong, a response is going to be needed. Remediation has to happen. There shouldn't be any surprises. We should be prepared and have a plan in place saying if something bad were to happen, this is how we're going to respond to it. Of course, people, as we said, need to be aware of the importance of security, the guiding principles, the do's and don'ts, all the things that we're talking about under security policy. So we need to think about that. And finally, we need to understand, and people have to recognize, that a proactive posture is what gets you ahead of the threats in some sense. Threats change continuously. If you just are going to be in reactive mode, something new is going to come and hit you, and you're going to suffer the same sort of thing that you did before. So proactively addressing the risk and the threats and the vulnerabilities and having a champion to do that is another part of this security planning and management that we're talking about. Overall, understand what is of value, why there's risk to it, which is the threats and the vulnerabilities that we're talking about, and then plan, implement, manage, and do that all proactively. That's sort of bringing it all together when it comes to security planning and management.
Hello and welcome back again to the CCTV IP Academy. In this episode, I'll try and give you a brief overview of digital network CCTV systems, the concepts and different designs. Of course, digital IP CCTV is now possible. Larger systems are being done and they are possible. The concepts in theory have been proven working correctly in practice. But you as a CCTV user or digital CCTV designer have to be aware of certain limitations the digital CCTV system has, like any other system. First and foremost, important is that once we convert the analog system to digital, the data stream that goes to a particular location for storage, for example, like a digital video recorder or network video recorder, needs to go through a network which has got certain limitations. First and foremost, the bandwidth, which is basically dictated by the speed, then also the distances, and of course there are different solutions for different applications. Most common As most of you know, copper connections, Cat5 and Cat6 for smaller to larger systems, medium-sized, large systems. Of course, for much bigger systems where distances may need to go over a couple hundred meters, fiber optics, digital network solutions. The most important part of all that concept is to understand where do we put the recorders in that system. So I'm going to try and explain these two basic different concepts. One of them is the so-called centralized storage concept, the other distributed storage system, and you will see which one is better and why. Let's now see with some simplified drawings the difference between the centralized and distributed storage. On this simplified drawing on the left, I have a representation of a network where IP cameras or streamers are connected on the network, and then via the network they go to a centralized storage. That means all the traffic that comes from each of these has to go through a particular network pipe, which has to have sufficient bandwidth to handle all the traffic without any losses when it goes to the storage. And in addition to that, the operator, when it calls up for any live footage or recorded footage from the storage area, has to go to the same network. So you can imagine then this particular area here connecting to the storage network connection will have to handle quite a lot of data traffic. The distributed architecture, which is shown on this second simplified drawing, is slightly different. That means that each camera or IP streamer can be in this case is actually storing first directly onto their own local IP storage. Then the network connection allows all of them to be available for the operator. So the key difference here is that the operator is only going to need the traffic here as many viewing stations or monitors he has at that time. So quite clearly you can see that if we have an example of, let's say, a typical reasonable size system of 1,000 cameras, if we assume a typical streaming rate of 1 megabit per second, which is not unrealistic, you could have 2 or 3 or even less, but if we have 1,000 cameras just for the recording itself with the central storage, we will require 1 gigabits per second. This is constant bandwidth required at that without considering the actual overhead losses that every network has. If we add to it 10 operators and we assume that, let's say, there are 2 monitors for each of the operators, that's another 20 megabits per second that you require in such a system. So as you can see, you need to have more than 1 gigabits per second constantly available for the traffic to be recording all the cameras and to be able to play back all the cameras. Using the same example, if we go to the actual distributed storage example, as you can see here, because all the cameras are recording on the periphery of the network, even if they're at 1 megabit per second, even higher, there is no effect on the actual network. Only the 10 operators using 2 monitors dictate what amount of bandwidth is required over there. So using the same example as here, if we have 2 monitors per operator, we only need about 20 megabits per second. And that is the conceptual big difference in the distributed storage, and the advantages are quite visible from this. So I hope you understand these two different concepts and why distributed architecture is theoretically and practically a better solution. There are a few other reasons for going with distributed architecture, and that is obviously the availability of the network, the availability of the modules is much higher, so the actual percentage of uptime of the whole system is much, much higher. It is possible to physically install the recorders or hard disks in one central room and still have distributed architecture solution, simply because the graphics that just explained refers to the network design concept. Physically, those devices can still be installed in a centralized location for cooling purposes, of course, and for security and maintenance by the CCTV IP guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you again in the very near future.
Home security is something that concerns us all. But what goes on at your home when you're not there?
Don't even think about it. You need to leave.
Introducing Floodlight Cam by Ring, a motion-activated security camera that puts HD video, automated recording, and a powerful alarm in your hands. Floodlight Cam is the ultimate in proactive home security. A 140-degree HD camera detects motion and captures video with two-way talk, and two high-beam LED smart lights